Hello, everybody. Welcome back to All Roads Lead to Archive, Qualstar's series about everything media, broadcast, and data, and managing those tons of media and data produced every day. Getting into the back end of all this is what we're up to today. We're sitting down with Jeremy Strootman, the Senior Director for Channel with Backlight, the folks behind Iconik, and Bryson Jones with North Shore Automation, who've been about connecting disparate things together into sensible workflows for quite a while. I've known both these guys for many a year, and they're well known in the systems design space for figuring out how to deal with media and workflow, and they're kind of the best in the business. Gents, thanks for joining me here today. First, let's get started with you, Bryson. How'd you end up in this crazy, awesome industry?
Yeah, all right. Quick version of it is I was working in IT at a television network, and it was right when they decided that edit bays were going to no longer be edit bays and they were going to be computers, right? And so I was hanging out a lot down there in their department, and they tried to hire me away. And it was very funny. I just decided instead to go freelance because didn't want to deal with the politics, and then almost immediately got pulled into installing Avid media composers, and that was in the late 90s. And then over the next few years, basically the next 10 years, I worked on larger and larger storage. And around 2007, I started to see that we were able to make more media than we could manage. And so 2007, I started deploying asset management systems and really gotten deeply into media management consulting. And then in 2010, I met my partner, co-founder, Damien Corbell, and North Shore happened in 2010, 2011. We formed up and started actually building software solutions. And so at that point, North Shore was launched. And I made the decision that storage, in my opinion, was going to become a commodity, and that problem was going to get solved by people, lots of smart people, but nobody was talking about asset management. So it was early, somewhat painful, but over the years, Jeremy and I partnered up. We met working when he was working at SNS and doing storage, and then just sort of through the years, kind of connected and did more and more stuff together till, it's crazy now. We've been working together like almost 20 years or something. It's crazy. Yeah.
True.
That is crazy. Jeremy, how about you? It sounds like we're going to get into probably career management as a service.
Yeah, that's a
Yes.
good one. Yeah. So like Bryson, I was on the IT side, primarily in IT sales. I'd done that for quite a few years, and it wasn't something that I was particularly passionate about in terms of, the actual subject matter. And I was living in St. Louis, Missouri at the time, and ended up coming into contact with Studio Network Solutions, which is what Bryson had just mentioned. So my entry into the business was building out shared storage solutions for media editorial workflows, post workflows, and things like that. So worked with them for better part of a decade. Met Bryson during that time. Eventually, we're partnering with other archive solutions and media asset management solutions, and it became very intriguing with me for me to get deeper into how the actual metadata informs action on media and so on and so forth. So that's where Bryson and I did the bulk of our work together, was on the MAM side. Moving data from storage to storage.
But it's important to note that in both those days, archive was integral to that
Yeah.
transition for both of us. That's something that's really interesting. I don't think about that, Jeremy, as much, but a lot of the man work we did was driven by archive even
Oh,
then.
100%.
So
Yeah,
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 yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yep. And the fun thing is we used to archive at the beginning and then work, and now things have definitely shifted. So I know that you all have spent countless hours talking about lifting everything to the cloud with different clients and organizations, but we all know that really isn't going to happen, especially on the larger enterprise size. What parts are actually able to go to the cloud, and then you can duplicate and use to keep track of things? What is having a duplicate in on-prem give you that ability to pull off? Jeremy, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, so you're right, Jeff. Like I'm still there. There may be a mythical organization that moved everything to the cloud successfully, and maybe they're talking about moving that back. I hear people like, yeah, we tried that. We tried the cloud, and now we're we want a more on-premise strategy or what have you. It's like I don't think that's fully the case. I think one thing that we've definitely noticed is the cloud. The obvious thing is people started treating the cloud like an archive. But one thing that we've noticed a lot of is actually the other side, where folks who are working remote, or they're remotely shooting, or there's event-based work or what have you. The team is actually collaborating and using the cloud as like a hot tier of storage, right? So that's the thing that I didn't really foresee coming out of when cloud started to become part of the conversation. But I'm seeing a lot of that where it's like, look, the cloud is the hot tier. It allows everybody to get access to everything whenever, no matter who you are or what your role in the pipeline is. And then, the source of truth for a lot of folks is on premise. So when it's done, it's wrapped and it needs to go cold. It can go to a source of truth that's sitting on premise. And then to your point, maybe that's for DR purposes, it's duplicated or replicated to the cloud.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But
mean, I'll pitch on that a couple of things. So first, I just want to say to Jeff, to you, thanks for having us on. It's hilarious that you trust us enough because we are strongly cloud guys, right? But we worked with tape though I mean, I've worked with tape for, I don't know, 25, 30 years now. It's crazy, but it's really funny because I've been fortunate enough to actually see some of those unicorn companies that do everything in the cloud. And I always tell people they typically are at the low end, getting their start where they haven't made a big CapEx expenditure, or at the extreme high end where the cost of management equals out if you're really going to deal with that. However, your point of that, Strootman, the term that I use when Jeremy and I talk about that hot tier cloud, I call it tier zero. So virtual file systems like, Suite, Lucid Link, things like that, storage, all those I call tier zero because you used to have the old tiers, you had tier one where you're editing, and then tier two, maybe nearline, tier three, maybe tape. Tier zero for us is that ultimately flexible stuff. The big thing though, and it's very funny. You probably, people who meet me wouldn't like a guy that looks like me. You probably wouldn't be thinking about the business case first, but I'm always thinking about that business case. And I've seen people get bit by tied into a platform, right? Happened with Avid. One of our largest businesses is Avid Interplay Migration at North Shore, and we're pulling people out of that purple triangle because they literally trusted their media into a media format. So that media and metadata, being able to make that be open. The same thing can happen with the cloud. The smartest people are keeping that copy, and the cheapest way to keep that copy for yourself is tape. Then when you get in a fight with your hyperscaler and you're like, well, I'm going to leave Microsoft and AWS is better, or vice versa, or wherever you go, you can just turn off that account. So there's so many things there. So I would say that for us, there's a certain place where, like, if somebody already has tape, for instance, and we come in to do a cloud transformation, I advise in every one of my consults, maybe you make a tape before you send it to the cloud. But we should, and we're going to talk about it in a bit, I know, get into that case where what Jeremy's talking about, which is you can't have tape in 17 locations around the country everywhere you hire a freelancer. And managing that and making that pipeline work is a big part of what we do today to make sure that the data is where it should be at the right moment. But yeah, largely forever. I mean, who's going to say a platform is forever, right? I remember Friendster and MySpace.
Nice. So the fun thing is when you do talk about the cloud workflow, and I've seen this, in my years as, running facilities, you walk into the vault, there's a box left. So the optimum workflow for that cloud where you're dealing with other people's stuff is you hand over the bucket at the end. It's like the box of stuff you send from the vault, or you're using the cloud bucket from the user at the beginning, but you're also telling them, yeah, I don't know how much it's going to cost. That's not just a film and TV thing, it's corporate as well. And then we get to the whole point of most organizations do not know what they have, or they just have too much, or the state of it. So do you want to talk about the way the waves of archive have happened in the past? And Bryson, let's kick this off with you.
Yeah, I mean, I come out of backup, right, and I moved into archive. So I was used to tape as backup systems, and then moved into archive. I just want one big pitch about that is that the reason a lot of times that doesn't happen, that dream, it also happens to tape too, because you choose some middleware that's not open and compatible, and you're like, well, you have to have this brand or you can't read these tapes. So
Yeah.
LTFS, that, but you really want to be careful about compliance, because that's where the friction. It's where tape got a lot of bad name, is because companies were like, oh no, you have to use our format. So I'm always going to advise people to use an open tape format. Not even when possible, just use an open tape format. If you're buying something that's proprietary, you're going to force everyone to use that. And years from now, we're going to be trying to find some way out of that. Or you're going to pay someone like North Shore a lot of money to get it out.
Isn't that what literally like part of what LTO stands for is open?
Yeah, linear tape open, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But you can put a semi-proprietary or somewhat proprietary format on it, which is bananas, right? Yeah, it's like So, but I would say that for me, the eras you talk about, the eras of archive, um, I talk a lot to people about this. Is do not, and this is like, I hope you guys all come yell at me at trade shows. Do not trust editors. Do not even trust post supervisors with your long-term content strategy, because they're under pressure and they're trying to just make the video. And I have a whole presentation I give about this, because you have to talk people out of letting the editors choose the media organization and the strategy, because the organization, so we tell people, editors never need a MAM. They mostly don't in our experience. The organization needs a MAM. The organization needs an archive. An editor never needs an archive. So letting an editor lay out your strategy, if you get luckily enough to move up to the big leagues, where you go talk to people that own libraries for 100 years, we have customers that their stuff's going to go public domain. They've owned it and monetized it for so long. When you get there, you know that I'm never going to, I always tell people, I used to say this, the original editor of Snow White had nothing to do with where they stored that film or how they stored that film, right? So I just want to say that now that it's digital, the first person that works for you is probably your editor, and they start that at every org. But at some point, you have to get a strategy. And once you get that strategy, then you do start worrying about, like, it's something we're going to talk about today a good bit. You're going to hear from us is acquisitions. If you build a company, if you build a property, you want to monetize it or you want to sell it. And when you want to sell it, you don't just sell it the first time. You sell it over and over. And in order to close that deal and for that check to clear, that has to be delivered. And I want to say that it's no longer a technical challenge. It is an organizational challenge. It is a business planning challenge to do that handoff that you're describing. And if you just spend the minimum amount of time with it, you can have a strategy where everything, I don't care if it's a petabyte, I can give it to somebody and they can, nowadays you can put a petabyte in almost like a legal box probably, it's not that big of a deal. So I think that that's a big thing that people need to think about is, my statement I always say is, your boss already thinks you're doing this.
Yeah.
Right? Your board, your CEO thinks you have a strategy. And if you don't, you probably want to flag to them that you've been busy making video, but you've not been thinking about the long-term retention or distribution of that video.
Well, and also, like you mentioned, selling archives of things like libraries of stuff to people later. I've listened to the gentleman from the Library of Congress, and he talks about the metadata that they need. And that has nothing to do with any of the stuff that we use in production. It has nothing to do with any of the business case metadata. And the thing is, those archives also exist. There's troughs of metadata and there's troughs of archive because they're all associated. If you want something to be available in 21, 25, you got to think about that well in advance from the business perspective. And that's the thing a lot of people don't necessarily get into there.
No, it's 100% right. Bryson and I have seen deals fall apart in that arena, because even if you do a great job of all this archive, and to your point, Jeff, you've got metadata that's associated with the creation of the project. It doesn't necessarily have all the correct title metadata. That metadata has changed and whatever. However, there are tools, there are ways that, like, NSA and other folks have taken those archives and married those with source of truth metadata platforms that make this data available. But yeah, it is a challenge, and I think Bryson kind of identified, like, they're kind of two. There's customers that are fully in the cloud and customers who are hybridized mostly, and the low end customer, or I don't want to call it low end, but folks that the
Or
smaller
shops, yeah, smart.
that built their organization, off the backs of remote workflow and all of that. They don't have that kind of like single source of truth. So a lot of that becomes just like a dumping ground in an S3 bucket. Masters go to YouTube. Where's everything else? What happens if someone wants to buy that library? It's not necessarily like prepped and ready to go. And it's a challenge because they might be sitting on hundreds of gigs of data, whereas the other guys, those guys have dedicated people who are archivists, who are in the business of data retention, who are not on the creative team. They've got full departments that are armed with
Them have college degrees in it.
even college degrees. Yeah. And it's
I
like,
always love when people figure that out, that you can get a degree, in archive science.
yeah,
We
yeah.
work with some of those people, but yeah.
Yeah, they call them librarians even. So those folks are sure they're probably putting everything in the cloud, but they're also probably keeping multiple copies on premise as well. But yeah, it's that middle ground, which is really like 80 or 90% of the customers that we're dealing with, where we have to guide them, like how much is appropriate for where you put it and all of that, and what talent and what staff do you actually have on the payroll that can help manage this. And that's where we really run into a bit of a negotiation in terms of trying to guide people, to Bryson's point earlier.
Yeah,
Wait. Okay, so when we close that, because a lot of times we bring up problems in these things and we don't give that solution. So I want to say, if you're watching this and you're kind of getting a cold sweat, feeling tightness in your chest because you don't have a budget to do that, know that there's a lot of information out there. You can get a relatively inexpensive consult for somebody that will just say, hey, just do this. And then later, when somebody has that 7 or 8 figure deal, 9 to buy all this, we can figure it out. It may just be that you get somebody who's a media professional, who's worked around MAM, who knows about this long-term business. Just do a small engagement with them and go, just make sure we're not messing anything up. There are choices you can make now that will secure you in the future, even if you don't have the best system in the world. So just want to say that like, there are things, but you do need to shift your thinking out of this is a production and this becomes a property that is going to live for a long time.
Yeah.
But I just want to bring that up because that's important for people to know too. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting is, I've got a degree in television production. At no time during any of my education did anyone ever come and say, "Let's talk about how you archive all this stuff you have made." It's like, no, we got videotapes. It's not a big deal. Didn't even think about it. So the thing I've always said about this is, I blame our nation's schools. We haven't taught people about this, and now we've got phones that make that side of it easy. Like, my phone, my things are backed up. I don't have to think about that. It just does it, as long as I pay the bill. And I think we'll get into that a little bit later. So, Jeremy, let's start with you on this one. We can have a talk about folks who start out in this and they don't have any physical infrastructure. What are you seeing out there in advising these folks to do? And at the end of that production or cycle, how are you able to then pack up and go out of that?
Well, yeah. So I think there's a couple things that I'm starting to see. I think when people are starting out with zero infrastructure, they're starting to leverage freemium storage type solutions like Dropbox and Google Drive and things like that. And if the three of us were going to try to put together any sort of professional looking video, we might be able to get by with it. But obviously, things start to scale. Those platforms aren't necessarily designed for the purposes of managing that volume of data. And then in some scenarios, when people they walk away with the link and then the data's gone, right? It's like, one of the beautiful things is Dropbox figured out a way to sell you the same terabyte of storage to like 5 people at the same time. But once that link disappears, and it's happened where it's like, hey, I'm just the editor. That link expired. I delivered my my master, and now I've walked away. So we've lost all the raw, right? Like, or it's just with that editor, and we got to find that guy again, right? So I see a lot of mistakes like that that are going on right now, and those are things like, hey, really start to think about a storage strategy, no matter where that is, but that the org itself actually owns or has control over the storage and not a third-party vendor. I see people getting into DAMs and MAMs, and some of those systems, the way they're architected, would even require you to push your data into their storage. So I think, at the end of the day, you do want to retain the right to own your own data on your own storage that you own in some capacity, and decouple workflow tools away from it, like your MAM or your DAM or whatever, and just walk away with your raw data. So, even though you're never going to own a cloud per se, you can own that relationship with, your AWS and all of that. And even there,
And I think you can own the results of that too. So, hey, I've got all this stuff I've had up there. I paid lots of money to get insights from, say, AWS Recognition. How do I then take those things and put them somewhere that I don't need to keep on a very hot tier of expensive storage in the
right.
cloud all the time?
Yeah, and that's key. I mean, I have all my data on premises and all of that. It's also in the cloud, but I can walk away from those guys at any time, and I'm in great shape. But I think really it's when the data gets too big and there's just too much data for the likes of like a Dropbox or a Google Drive or something like that. That's when the pain starts to set in. And then it's like no matter what you do, it's still a pain to move or migrate or whatever.
Like, by the way, explaining to IT that that unlimited storage deal is not unlimited.
Right.
My
We've
favorite,
seen that, right? Like
my favorite one is when, the argument of like, well, I have unlimited Google Drive. You're like, yeah, but you can only put 750 gigs a day in. And you're like, oh, okay,
yeah,
and that's going to take, and how long is it going to take to get it back, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, my most successful customers, I have a customer right now that we're actually putting into Backlight and AWS, but they have everything on 2 geolocated RAIDs, which was a great starting thing. They had only a couple people in doing production, and so they were like, well, we have a RAID here and we have a RAID there, and we share everything off of in that case, they're using a virtual file system. So they have their cloud edit storage, and they copy it all down, and they keep that in sync between the two. Now we're going to add cloud as that third location. More importantly, now, especially with remote work, the organization now, because the organization, those are people's offices or houses or whatever, home offices. And so it's hard to physically lay hands on that. So now the organization can own the AWS cold archive, and then they can own, that with, the metadata in Iconik and have that set up. That's a big thing there. I'd like to see, we'll talk about, I think, in a bit, but I'd like to see people take longer term storage more seriously. Right now, everyone's really comfortable. When we all three started, nobody was buying shared storage, not much. It was only just like Hollywood. You lived in New York or LA, Chicago, Dallas, basically, if you had shared storage. If you didn't, Atlanta, if you didn't go in a major market, everybody was just working on a local hard drive. It was a nightmare. And now you mostly see people able to buy shared storage. Now the idea is, can we get them to where they mostly also own something that for 30 plus years will be there and be solid? That's probably the next wave, which
Yeah. And it'll be there and not necessarily at the price. Because the thing is, we get into this concept of tape as a service. And most people are like, I run into people all the time. They're like, well, we don't do tape anymore. Well, do you have Deep Glacier? That's tape as a service. You're just paying someone else to do it.
Yeah.
And I was in New York the other week with at the SVG show, and someone was talking about how NBC did an entire cost-benefit analysis, and the cost to have it in the cloud was 5 times as much as to have it on LTO. So they said, we're going to keep it on tape. And you can keep stuff in the deep archive in the cloud that you're going to need to pull out in other regions if you don't necessarily have that, connectivity between your existing data centers that's fast enough, though that's coming up pretty dang quickly as well. So let's get a little bit further into that whole tape as a service. where it's either your own or you get service providers that give you the access you need. And then it gets also wider with the concept now that's coming out, and we're about to embrace that as well, of basically it's tape presenting as S3. So it kind of begins to smash that easy button for folks like, oh, I just put it in the S3 bucket. No, you actually put it on tape. You just didn't know it, which is,
Yeah.
for me, a wonderful place to be in.
Yeah.
What and let me get that for a second. What you just said, like, right, because this hopefully this podcast gets shared out to bosses who may or may not be technical and understand what this is. You can own a tape drive, a library autoloader, whatever your form factor you want to talk about, and not be able to put data on it because you need some sort of middleware or translation layer in it. That's something that really confuses people. It happens in hard drives. If you have a raw hard drive, you can't put data on it either. You need like some kind of box to put it in. So that middleware we're talking about. So what Jeff's talking about is taking S3 is a type of storage, and it is also a protocol, an API that you can connect to storage using an S3, API. And so in this case, what we're talking about is being able to put tape behind an S3 interface, because most of the MAMs or systems out in the world can use S3. Even FTP clients can use S3. So you can do that. So you no longer need this kind of other software. You can just, anything that's compatible with the cloud is compatible with tape. So it's a really interesting sort of situation that's opened up. I just want to kind of pitch that in as a quick explainer on that.
Right. I wouldn't have,
S3 back storage.
yeah, I wouldn't have paid money to do that survey on, what is more cost effective, tape or cloud, because I would have just done both, now I'm from a place of convenience with an unlimited budget in my mind where I can do that. Right. But I think the correct answer is really both. Right.
That's from the folks who are doing the Olympics this year. They're the ones saying, we can't, both doesn't make sense financially, because somewhere up the line, someone's asking questions like, why do you have these $2 items in these budgets? Aren't these the same thing? And that's why it makes sense for them to start. They're at that scale where it keeping that money in hand is much better for them.
Mm-hmm. So I've had to justify my business's existence for the last 15 years, right? That's been something we've dealt with for years now. And now you just hit the point where you're there. Because now you go, well, wait a minute. How do I do this? Well, you need orchestration. The reason it's North Shore automation is that is about the fact that manual labor will fail you if you start trying to say, you know what? I want to copy on disk. I want to copy in the cloud, some of it, not all of it. And then I want everything on tape. So at that point, you need automated systems to do that. Normally, a MAM helps orchestrate that. That's not necessarily required. But that's where the number one driver for people implementing media asset management across mine and Jeremy's career has been someone says, I need to archive. And it used to be everything goes to archive. It was more like a backup. Now it's like, I need to archive, but I need to know, for instance, talking to you, Jeff, I need some of this on a very hot cloud tier. I need some of it in a very cold cloud tier. I need a certain format created that's a mid-level mezzanine that's good enough that can go to the cloud and be shared. And then I need the high-res here. Once you start managing all those versions, it gets really confusing. The only other option is to put everything everywhere, which is expensive, as Jeremy was saying, or then you can implement some sort of media asset management solution where you can say, I have rules. My proxy, my low res is in the cloud, my high res is in the building, and whatever I do. And I'm going to distribute a mid mezzanine to some people in Europe. Great, I'll put that in the cloud. All of a sudden, your cloud spend is less because proxy and mez, you've got everything high res, high speed in your facility, and then you can archive that maybe to tape or to cold. Managing that with a human is nearly impossible.
So I think that gets into why MAM is really an important thing. That structure that does things that probably even AI can't do for you yet. And that gets into the whole taxonomy, the curation, and incremental use of it. So what do we do with the archive infrastructure? Who's going to support it? And why is MAM so important there?
Well, yeah, and as Bryson pointed out, it's funny because a lot of people think a MAM is just going to help you find where stuff is. And it's it's actually kind of directing where stuff goes more realistically if you're doing it right, So it's initially you get to that because of what Bryson had said. Somebody comes along and says, you know what, we've documented a policy in a spreadsheet, and there is a rules of engagement that we're going to make a copy here and a copy there and do this and do that. And then, a few, personnel changes and next one thing leads to another, and now data is just everywhere and no one knows exactly why. And we have that challenge in naming conventions. You can tell when Susan was in charge because Susan had that naming convention, and then Jan comes along and all of a sudden it shifted to a totally different thing. So that's usually what drives MAM, is to enforce policies and enforce data movement based on policy. That's when we get invited to the party usually. Invited to the party usually.
And it keeps you covered in case someone, gets hit by a winning lotto ticket. Just says, I don't care.
Oh yeah, no, not us, Jeff. We're not that lucky, but
No. I mean, it's usually. I'll give you an example business case of that, right? Because people are like, it's hard. We joke about, it's hard to do the ROI on a MAM. And so here's one for you. We all three were on this client. I won't name the client, but all three were there. Of course, as usual, I caught the short end of the stick. So I pulled the short straw. So here you go. Strootman, by the way, let me just say publicly on every podcast we do together, Strootman has put me in more difficult situations than anyone in my life. So the fact that we're still friends shows what a great guy he is. So here you go. Customer.
Incredibly forgiving to me.
Yeah, maybe it is just that.
I never made the same mistake twice. I just
I will say that. Yeah. So here's one that an editor did. One of the things that happens is that in the real world, editors and the media manager made a decision. 200 projects at a large corporate account, 200 projects in a file system, and they had put all of their final masters in the project folder 6 layers deep. And someone said, you know what, guys? We need all the masters. We need all the masters together. We need every one of the masters. And so the editors had named some exports and some masters, right? So you had some folders called exports and some called masters. They had certain formats that were in there, and certain formats were higher res than others. And they were buried in files, 200 folder structures, 6 layers deep. And so the poor person, when we were working with them and we caught them doing this, and they were like, what are you doing? They're like, oh, I'm going through and I'm getting all the masters out and I'm moving them over here. And we were like, hold on. And they had a MAM. So we went to the MAM. We searched for folder containing masters or experts in the name. We searched for a certain format that we knew was the version they wanted of the video format. We found all of the 200 high-res masters, and with one click, we moved them. And at that point, they were like, oh, wow, we were going to spend days to weeks on that. And we're like, yeah, you can do that in 10 minutes, and then the machine copies. It's one of the greatest quotes.
If they had done that manually, there probably would have also been human error involved.
They would have missed things. They would have done it wrong. Yeah, exactly. And they also wouldn't have had any accountability or reporting of what actually happened, right? We were able to show them that 200 files moved, and here's where they moved, and we maintained them, right? My partner's favorite saying of his is, that's what the computer is for. If you're doing something hard, Damien will stop you and he'll go, dude, that's what the computer's for.
Yeah.
So,
You don't need to do all this heavy lifting. It's things we got that'll do that for you. So talking about heavy lifting, let's get into a discussion about migration and how those have behaved for y'all. What do you do when companies have failed to follow those simple rules of backup?
Yeah, you charge a lot. I'll just say it. You just charge a lot. You got to know, you need to know that right now. If you're creating a nightmare, there's not a company on the planet that's going to come in and clean that up for you inexpensively. So migration is a big part of North Shore's business. And I will say that this is interesting to note. This is the net metric you need. If you kept your stuff clean, and let's say you had an old MAM and an old storage system, and then you're going to move to this new one. If you kept everything clean and linked up and good, we're going to charge you X. If we run the migration and we find problems, it's 2 to 3X the original cost to clean it up. So keep it clean the first time if you can, because we don't, and it's not money we want to make. Nobody wants to do that job, but it's a really big deal because, like you said, we three have seen global organizations split. The craziest thing I ever saw was I saw two companies one company that was splitting, and they had to split 4 petabytes into two 2-petabyte structures. And they were able to do that relatively quickly because they had media management. They knew what everything was, and they had automation to go, you get these and you get these, and all the lawyers were happy. So just say that along the way, at some point you have to stop and clean it up. Either you have to do it and you usually get brought in when it just would take years if you don't automate it. That is one place I'm bullish. I am weirdly negative about a lot of AI right now because I work with it every day and I know the true state of it. I will say, however, we are starting to see a lot of help in that way. And I would say that in the next few months, that will start to help us and clean up. It's one of the first places we'll see. You should not do it yourself because it's highly, highly variable. But being able to combine some artificial intelligence and machine learning does help you automate faster. And that's going to be probably the next year for us, is using those processes.
We start to get painkillers for the media root canal you have to do.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that is exactly what it is. Yeah. But
Well,
yeah.
and Bryson, he kind of flew by this one point that I want to kind of slow down on, and that's like the lawyers inked that deal. The lawyers built the terms, they put the terms around that deal, which, they decide the timeline, and salespeople decide, the comment that we made earlier about me putting Bryson into painful situations is because I don't know what I'm selling half the time. I know what I'm selling, but there are contingencies in there that are not up to myself or Bryson to determine, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's when it gets painful. It's like when a salesperson sells the library or a lawyer decides when the term of the split needs to happen by, they're not thinking about a big messy bucket of S3 mess, so they don't know what it is they're actually pitching or writing down. They just think, in a month this should happen, and it's like,
And it goes back to what Bryson said earlier. Your CEO thinks you're doing this already. Oh, no.
bingo. Yeah, exactly.
The lawyers, it's very funny we mentioned this, being older in our careers. The lawyers still think there's a room full of this stuff somewhere. Right.
Yeah.
They still think that you're going to go that one, not that one, that one, not that one. Right. And so, yeah, it's a big thing. And Jeremy, I think the piece that
off the shelf and send them in a box over to, it's not how it works.
Yeah. And the thing that I love that you said, first, people should know that, like, you're seeing us. Hopefully this is, you appreciate this. Like, to go back to the beginning, I love, Jeff, that you and Qualstar brought us on because we aren't the bullish tape guys all the time. And we have migrated people, from and out of tape and stuff. We've seen a lot of the warts on those workflows and stuff and all. But hopefully you get the feel that we are, concerned for the industry as a whole and our customers and even the people that aren't our customers. Mr. Strootman, what you said, the thing that what you wanted to say is, I want to correct it because you always know you're one of the most technical salespeople I've ever met in my life. But we can't know everything that someone hid in the deal for us, right? We're going to go in and we're going to open that and take a look in that digital closet, and there's no telling what's there. And so I'm the person, Jeremy's talking, everyone's talking to him and saying what they think is the case. And then my team rolls in, and then someone invariably calls me on my team and goes, someone was not clear about what they had, right? Like, oh, what is this? There's 400,000 files, in another piece of media that's in Cincinnati that no one thought about.
Yeah, the first migration I sold for Bryson, I failed to qualify that the actual archive was going to be plugged in and turned on and still connected to everything, and not sitting in a box in a basement somewhere unplugged. So, like, it's down to the kind of stuff where it's like, we just assumed, but I guess we know what that means.
We assumed that you would keep your system live until you migrated it. And we literally had called on the engineer, and the engineer's like, "What are you guys doing?" And we were like, "This thing." He goes, "Oh, that's in a stack in the corner of the machine room, disconnected." And we were like, "Well, you should try to put that back together because that's got all your data on it." I love that story.
Well, we hope it's got all your data on it. Sometimes
exactly. We assume until we know, we're all going to be very scared.
It's on fire. The dumpster's actually on fire.
Oh, and to a pitch, that's the thing. I'm doing right now, one of the big broadcasters in America right now, we're doing migrations for them coming off of a tape system that they had. And in many cases, they have literally like e-wasted the hardware. But you know what? They always have the tapes. And that's the key thing of it. But then going back to that metadata, the question is, do you have the tapes and do you have a database? And so we're about to release actually guidelines for people when they are decommissioning old systems. Like, please just do this. Like, if you own this, please get this and this, and then the doctors can help you. Right. And that's a big deal. But I just want to say that before you decommission stuff, just just email us. Even if you have no budget, I would rather take 15 minutes and talk to you and tell you what not to do than to see you call me a year later and go, we now have the budget. We've literally done pro sports teams where they didn't have the budget, they decommissioned something, they come back a year later and we got the budget to get our stuff, and someone made a mistake in decommissioning it and they've lost the data. And that's culturally significant data.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, speaking of that, that gets to and I've heard you talk about this in the past, Bryson, the digital gulf of 1998 to February 29th, 2009.
I love that you looked it up. This is why I love you. Yeah, man, I've been talking for years about a thing that hit me. I call it like the digital gulf, the digital canyon. And what it is that I realized that I have all my photos from up until 98. And then I have all my photos after 2009. But if you ask me for a photo from like 2000, 2001, I have almost none. And the reason is because I made the transition from shooting film, 35 millimeter film, to shooting digital on cameras. But I did not have any sort of media management. And I was just like downloading cards onto some laptop or something. And even as a media professional, your best plan of like, oh, I'll copy it to here, how old I am. I copy it to a FireWire drive, dude. And those drives failed, that laptop. So I started talking to my friends about it, and they were like, everyone had a story. Oh yeah, I have a laptop. It's in the closet because it has all my photos from my wedding on it, but I didn't, it broke and I can't really afford to do recovery or whatever. The only person I will say that does not have that story is Strootman, because he worked around a tape company at the time. Strootman, give your story. Where are your files from 2003?
So I had a RAID. Being a storage guy, I was very heavy on RAID. That way I could sustain data, drive failures and things like that. Then the single point of failure becomes the controller that controls the RAID. So that controller died on me. And I said, well, that's no problem. I have all of this backed up in the cloud. Even at that time, I had it backed up in the cloud, but I was using a backup utility that was corrupting the data before it sent it to the cloud. So I had no data. And the only thing that saved me was, to Bryson's point, I was partnering with and working with a tape company at the time. And I happened to have a tape machine in my basement, a drive. And I was just like, well, I'll copy these files to an LTO tape, 2 LTO tapes, just to try this thing out. And I went back into a closet and I dug and dug and dug, and I found those tapes, and I pulled those tapes out, and I asked another buddy of mine, totally different manufacturer, by the way, which gets back to your point earlier on, Bryson, about the open format. Plugged that tape into that completely different manufacturer and was able to restore all of that data. So when Jeff talks about the 3-2-1 rule, we talk about, if your data is not in triplicate, you don't have a single copy of it, and all of that. Like that actually came out of my own personal experience. So yeah.
And the reason that this came up to me was that I know that culturally, I'm watching people digitize their videotapes, right? And we know the famous Dell statement, which is true. They did the calculation that there are more hours of beta tape in the world than there's head life to read them. So it's not if we're going to lose data, we are going to lose part of our culture. And I started trying to get this out to people to say like, hey, go find that stuff. Go get it. I was able to recover a corrupt iPhoto library and get some of my stuff. I still myself have a drive that ended up not being properly backed up because I lost the backup. Like you said, Strootman, right? The 3-2-1 rule. So for me, having those 3 formats has become really critical. And it's just an interesting thing that like you don't think about. It's just something I want to bring up though culturally because it's important. At this point, you get older, you want to look back at your life. And things become important. One of my favorite things is old television commercials when I was a kid. Nothing gives me more joy than the G.I. Joe commercials or a Evel Knievel, the wind up thing. And I love that. Baby. I see that stuff on YouTube and I'm like, man, thank goodness somebody took whatever that tape was, probably 1 inch or something, 2 inch at the time, and transferred it. But, it's much easier for us. But I just want to bring that up, that like the idea of a bulletproof copy of everything, It's not sexy. Nobody wants to. No one's gonna like come in and sexy salesman of selling you tape. But the thing is that if you pin me down, no matter how, like if I'm in the room with everyone from AWS and Suite Studios and Backlight and all, and they go, "What do you do? What do we make? What do we do when the zombie apocalypse comes?" You're like, "Well, you're probably going to want to have something on tape because it's the only thing that's affordable to us." Like that's not the Library of Congress, right? Their methods, which
Right.
is
Yeah.
amazing.
And,
Yeah.
and the other thing there is, you mentioned FireWire. Some people say, "Oh, I've got everything on FireWire sitting back in the closet." And okay, that's great. If you take them out and they're still spinning, your Mac doesn't talk to those anymore. It's done. The drivers were abandoned. So last month when I was in St. Louis at the supercomputing show, gentleman comes up and he says, "Oh, I still have LTO1 running in my garage." It's like, "Oh, do you want to upgrade?" "No, I don't need to upgrade. It's working great." So he still has data from 20, 25 years ago that he's able to use and keep running because the format is valid. He doesn't have to worry about drivers going away or anything like that. I mean, yes, it's not LTFS because that came along in 5, LTO5, but he still has his stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I gotta tell you, LTO1 running in his garage. Not only is his data safe from 25 years ago, but that's amazing level of geekery. My hat is off. I tip my hat to you, sir.
I was going to take this conversation in a different direction, but like it is true. It is true though that there's example after example of like the Nashville floods and all of that, where it's like I mean, at the end of the day, can you get this stuff out? If it was all in the cloud, if everything was in the cloud, you get it out? Yes, it's just going to cost you money. The problem becomes that hard decision that people have to make is like on stuff that's like it's worth it, but it's just not worth that much money.
Yeah.
So like, of course, yes, I'm going to pay anything to unlock, the masters of Snow White out of the cloud, right? But for, that, rodeo sport that's like important, but like mildly important and doesn't warrant the kind of extortionary budget that you might need to get to unlock that. Like it becomes a challenge where I think, I don't think you're going to lose stuff if you put it in the cloud. You just may not want to pay enough money to get it back out of the cloud.
Art, yeah, I'll give you an even better one. Art, is your CEO's kickoff presentation from 25 years ago, right? We want it, we want to pay honor him. What is it going to cost to do it? I do want to bitch one thing here because I love the fact that you don't do a hard sell on this thing, but I do want to say something that's interesting for Backlight and one of our tape partners, Zendata. We had a customer that had a gigantic, and it's a good thing about media versus metadata here too, had a gigantic tape archive run by Zendata. And so North Shore has built a tape connector that actually allows you to archive using Iconik. So you have a cloud MAM that can send files to any of the major hyperscalers or actually on-prem from the ISG scan over to the tape system. So you don't have to choose and they don't have to manually do it. So now if they apply an archive policy, they technically could have archive high res in the building, tape in the building, and then deep cloud on the same thing with one operation. So I just want to say that this is not theoretical.
One place to track it all, which is inside of Backlight, because I had it with Zendata a couple of weeks ago. We'll pop the link in so you can go back and catch that. That's the connector. Just because you when you need to know, it's possible to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the migrations. That's one of the most painful things that people run through is just finding that stuff. And it's wild. I go back to film. I've had twice in my life, I've had friends. I'm from the South. Y'all may not have picked that up. But I got twice have I had historically significant pieces of film found. And because I live in Hollywood, everybody calls me from back home and goes, "Where do we go to get this transferred?" And one was a president, U.S. president that was visiting Arkansas. And then another one is a huge civil rights action that happened that was a hidden clip. And that came to me. And it's wild because you're trying to figure out what it is. You don't know what it is. There's no provenance. So there is no metadata of it, And then we went to tape where we have like, okay, I have a videotape and I have what's written on it. Now, thanks to AI, we can read those instead of typing them like we used to have to do in there and all. Now, the next step is like, hey, could we just have the metadata? So could I have an LTO tape and could I have a MAM, and almost every MAM can actually pack your data up and go. So if any data that you put into any MAM that NorthSource ever deployed, you can have that data in an open format. Backlight, you may not know how to do it. We have methods to do it. They have an open API. So the idea that your metadata is open and your media is open, it's my wish for the whole world that going forward, that's the ability there, is that you have your media and your metadata and it's transportable to what you want to buy. But regardless of what the three of us want to sell you, you should own your data. And that pack up and go statement is a really big deal. Can you pack up and go, or are you beholden to someone? Is someone going to charge you to get your data back? And that's a big geekery, that's a really open source, internet, forward concept that never existed until now in media and entertainment. It was always some company owned your data and charged you to get it back. Crazy.
Yep. Yeah. And the other piece we're seeing now is people are concerned. It's not just about the data. It's about the intellectual property you've got out there in someone else's storage.
Yeah.
I've heard of plenty of people who they've got everything in hyperscalers here and then they've got it elsewhere. And if someone comes along and says, we're taking your IP to use it for XYZ, they're just going to simply hit the button and say, no, there's no IP here. It's all gone. Because they can then, and this is the whole thing about having that archive there, you can act with impunity. You're not beholden to anyone for financial, political, or whatever reasons.
Yeah, let's put our X-Files tinfoil hats on for a minute and get into that, because I love that. The physical, I'm going to say it in a really interesting way. The physical limitation of tape is not always a bad thing. The fact that it is tangible and in a location, right? If you have geolocated data, as you guys all know, if you ever dealt with the EU's data laws are wild, and you can't touch stuff there, and sometimes it's a pain, right? But the idea that you could say, yeah, my data is actually located somewhere else, and it becomes, in a way almost like international banking and things like that. So it's interesting we think of that data, but I think it is important to think of that. And that leads us to this other thing that you mentioned before. It's like this fractional tape as a service, fractional tape ownership. Before we get out of here, I want to put together that, like, I'm a person that's always pushed for, all three of us, actually. I look at your career, Jeff. It's funny because, like, a lot of us, I think all of us started working for gigantic organizations. We've been fortunate to work for some of the biggest media companies in the world. But a lot of my big customers weren't big customers when they started with me, and I love nothing more than that. And so for me, the idea to say there's this barrier to entry of cost for tape sometimes and complexity. And I love the fact that people are starting to work on this. I think it's something that I hope more people get into this business. I was saying, there's a lot of private data centers now. Those of you who are out there considering whether you're on-prem or cloud, there is a third option, which is people offer, the data center, and you can locate your storage there. Even AWS does that. You can put your own boxes in an edge, data center. The idea that for me now is that this sort of idea of fractional tape, because the ability to just have a tape, I have a lot of customers that provide post and media management services, and it's great. What they do, they collect the customer's data. One of them does this for a large heavy equipment manufacturer, global, and they have 7 or 8 production companies shooting. They send all their media to this one little shop. This little shop indexes everything, puts it into a MAM. They send a mezzanine version up to the cloud. They send a cloud archive, and they make 2 tapes. One stays in Southern California, and one goes back to the corporate office. And they now have multiple copies of all that data with no one doing it. They never bought any infrastructure, and they also aren't beholden to any particular hyperscaler. At this point, they have their copy, a contractor copy, and then a hyperscaler copy. And that's autonomy. I mean, I wish that more people in that company knew how cool that was and how rare.
The fun thing is you mentioned about how small organizations don't have the budget. One of the things I did for one of the largest organizations I worked for was I'd come in at 6 a.m. and begin deleting. There's no backup. This was only digital records. That there's a line cut somewhere. that may live for another 5 years, but camera masters, they're gone. I've seen stuff that would have changed the course of elections that just no one ever thought about, and it's just
Yeah.
amazing the way that works.
No, it's our history. And I've seen in physical media, I've seen dumpsters pulled up to places and they threw film away. I saw a major like hot rod and car collection just destroy tons of Southern California history from the 40s and 50s, which how many people would love to see that? And there's no reason you can't now. We can make a low res copy, we can keep it, we can do all that. But I don't know, man. I spent a lot of time making horrible reality shows and helping people make really bad television. But I got to say that the way I wash my karma for that is that I help people preserve the historical record. And we don't get to judge what's the historical record. Maybe the Housewives of Beverly Hills or whatever is part of the cultural record, better or worse. And I think that that's something that also people look at. Corporate media doesn't get the play that it deserves. Like how right now, how much would you pay for early recordings of Steve Jobs when he and Woz were figuring out Apple? How much would you pay for all these people when they were the powerful CEOs we know? And we're in an era now where we can get that. Now we have a few years of digital media did it, but we got to preserve that. And like you said, the answer is not just that we keep filling up hard drives and paying for electricity.
No, and the answer isn't necessarily that it all has to go to the cloud because you don't have a four-walled brick and mortar building. But to your point, just because you don't have a brick and mortar building doesn't mean you can't get somebody to send you an LTO tape of your data and you can sit on it, right?
Yeah, I'm watching that right now in Los Angeles, and there's another company in New York I know that do this, and they basically will co-locate your equipment. So it started during the pandemic in Los Angeles when these big companies, it's very interesting watching this transition. They would take their edit storage, take their edit bays, they would remote into those bays, and those bays went from having these giant facilities, rough on Los Angeles real estate market, but basically they moved into, you could be in 2 racks now. So there are major studios in Los Angeles that used to like rent studio space and all that, and they just started renting rack space. People would remote in. Now that's moved out to like data centers and private data centers, and you have people there that can manage it, they can reboot for you, they can do all those things. But that remote work, the media is not actually remote. The media is in one location, and they have all their infrastructure there. So I'm right now really encouraging those people to start to offer not just data disaster recovery backup, but also archive services with that. So you can say, yeah, everything that's in my magic little cloud shared bucket, even if I only have a couple of terabytes, all of it is going down into this thing. And that's a thing for me. I got to build a couple of facilities in the last couple of years that had no physical infrastructure. And I thought that was so cool. Now I want them to have no physical infrastructure, but I do want them to have physical copies of their media because that's their IP. That's actually what they got paid to make.
Yeah. Right. And so, Jeff, earlier when we started this thing, you'd mentioned, when you got started, you archived. That was the first thing you did. Can you talk about that? Like,
so that was a job.
Yeah, that was working for one of the big monoliths. The thing is, when we started in all of this, we always archived first because we shot on film, we shot on tape, and it goes back to that whole.
That was the archive. See what I'm saying?
That was the archive. Yeah,
archive. It was implicit in the capture method.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, actually, we're getting to the point where, with if you put erasure coding in front of a tape library, where we could begin to record to tape again.
Yeah,
there'd be some different caveats in there, but we're almost to that point again. I mean, 400 megabits a second writing to LTO 10. Think about a 220 megabit stream. Okay, that fits. We can record that. Provided you've got a couple other things in place.
Yeah.
So, Strootman, to pick. Oh, go ahead, Strootman. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna. There's no reason why. I'm a big fan of archive upon ingest anyway. So if it's not going directly to tape, there should be the copy that goes on tape and then the copy that gets spit onto a file system.
People don't realize that. When I became the high def cowboy, right, during that high def, the thing that happened during the HD transition from SD to HD was also that the actual tsunami hit Fukushima, and all of a sudden you couldn't get XD-cam discs. So around those same times, we had this situation where we'd been making the last physical formats for these Sony discs and stuff, and we're like, okay. And then everyone started to switch over to like, oh, there's no there anymore, right? And so that's when I really, really started to push on LTO, because LTO replaced the actual physical camera media. And that's the way, if you're looking to budget for it, that's the way you budget. The first production, like not studio, but production archive systems that I was ever involved in were people that were replacing the $100,000 of tape that they used to have to buy to shoot. The problem was the industry dropped that budget out of the production budget. We don't need to buy tape anymore. We don't need to buy those $50 discs or whatever. But when HD cam tape was $100 a tape, boy, it was pretty easy to get somebody to buy an archive. But that's why I think I love that, Jeff, that you say it that way, but it does need explanation, is that we always, since the beginnings of photography, we archive when we capture. And now we no longer archive as we capture. And that's a change that should terrify every media IP owner. I know you're going to say that professional is shooting it. No, but if you own IP, it's your responsibility to be like, wait. And most of them never saw that happen. Like you said, the boss thinks it's all worked out. It was never worked out.
And the question everybody in production asks is, how quickly can we get those cards back? We've got more stuff tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the thing. The cycle just continues and continues and continues. So if you're archiving as you go, or as close to capture as possible, you're pretty much covered at that point. So if something horrible happens, oh hey, we lost the raid. Okay. Yeah, it's going to be a pain in the ass, but it's not a couple $1 million worth of reshoot days.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, if you have a MAM and you have an automated archive, it's not even a pain in the ass. You hit the button and it all goes. That's when you call North Star Automation, right? It's a pain if it was manually done, but if it was ingested into a MAM and it was already sent to an archive, it's literally a button push. Select all, bring it back, I'll see you. Otherwise, you're all going to be there, sitting there pulling tapes all night and waiting on them, to come back and stuff and all. So I just want to say that, like, that's the piece of automation. When you get too big to fail, when you get too big to physically do it, we joke, like, people don't hire us. People that don't hire us because they want to hire us. North Star gets hired because you have to, because you've exceeded the scale of human effort. Or the cost of the human effort's too high. That's the next thing. I'm loving what's going to happen this year. This year we're going to see wild, jumps in productivity, and I love it. So it's good. Yeah, man. Crazy. This is fun, dude.
It's always good to be productive. All right. So, Bryson, Jeremy, thanks for joining me today, and to our audience, thanks for diving in. There's a lot to unpack here. On All Roads Lead to Archive. I hope you've gotten out of as much out of this deep dive as I have. Please hit those like and subscribe buttons down there. And as always, a special thanks to Avid Technology for the editorial platform that we're using. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.